Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Kuf Yud Gimel. We actually made, according to Dove, some decent progress into daf Kuf Yud Gimel, which is nice because it sort of ended. The top of the daf ended in the middle of an inyan, a middle of an idea. So we were able to at least complete that idea, and so we actually begin. Uh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 lines down. Amar Rebbe Abahu. And just as a reminder of where we've been, we're talking about inheritance. That's been the topic of Yesh Nochlin. We ended the last chapter discussing sort of different rules associated with the kinyanim in connection with inheritance. And now we're actually sort of doing the prioritization of who takes possession. Indeed, the Mishnah that we will be learning eventually will actually go through the specific order of we'll be doing it over this coming weekend. We'll go through the specific order of inheritance. Who inherits first and how we deal with that. That's going to be the Mishnah on Kuf Tet Vav. So that, I guess, is Friday's daf. Now, at the end of today's daf, maybe after I turn off the recording, we'll go over sort of what the schedule will be over the course of the Chag. So, but let's get into it. Let's go get started. So, Amar Rebbe Abahu, Amar Rebbe Yochanan, Amar Rebbe Yanai, Amar Rebbe. So Rabbi Abahu said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, who said in the name of Rabbi Yanai, who said in the name of Rebbe, highlighting the fact that when we speak, we don't, we should ideally try to speak in the name of the person who originally said it, while at the same time potentially giving credit to those who shared it in the interim. Umatu ba mishmei de Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha. And other people said it was in the name of Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha. Now, we're going to utilize the fact that we have a little bit of extra time because we did the first quarter of the daf already. We'll go through the Tosos, who actually goes through who this Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha may be. What did all this say? So what did the person say? That when it comes to an inheritance that a husband takes from his wife, how do we know that the only things that he gets from his wife are the things that are currently in her property and not things that may eventually go into her property? So what's the difference between those two categories? We're in the middle of Daf Kuf Yud Gimel. The difference between those two categories is the following: that if in fact a woman inherits from her father because she's the only child, a piece of property, and then the woman, so her father dies, and then she dies. Well, then the husband inherits that piece of property. But on the other hand, if she were to predecease her father, and so she is roi, she's fit to potentially receive the inheritance from her father, but she has not yet done so. And now she dies, and now her father passes away. Then the husband does not get his wife's inheritance. It does not go through that wife to the husband, but rather the husband loses out. And how do we know that? Shneamar uskuv holides yair. I think we may have seen this already, that Seguv had the child Yair, Vayihi lo esrim v'shalosh arim be'eretz Gilad, and he possessed 23 cities in the land of Gilad. Now, Minayan Yair shalo hayalo liskov. How in the world did Yair acquire something that did not belong to his father Seguv? So, Ella milamed shenasa Seguv isha. So it must be that the Seguv married a woman, Umesa b'chaye Morisheha, and she died during the lifetime of those who were going to cause her to inherit, Umesu Morishehu, and then after she died, her um, uh, 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 the people who would cause her to inherit died, and therefore Virasha Yair, and therefore Yair inherited from her. So again, so if we have, let's do Rachel, Yaakov, and Yosef. So again, they'll be in the regular positions, and we'll do um, uh, 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 Lavan. So we have Lavan, Rachel, Yaakov, and Yosef. So now Lavan is, if Lavan predeceases, so Lavan is of course Rachel's father. Rachel marries Yaakov and has a child, has son Yosef. So if Lavan dies before Rachel, so then when Rachel dies, so Yaakov inherits Rachel. But if Rachel dies before Lavan, so then when Lavan dies, and we'll assume for the moment that Lavan had no other children, and so Rachel's going to inherit Lavan. So then when Rachel, and if Rachel has already died, so then instead of that property going to Yaakov as the inheritor of Rachel, it goes to Yosef, who is Rachel's son. So, and that's exactly the situation that happened here with Seguv and Yair. The Omer. Now, and we have another verse that says a similar story. Elazar ben Aaron mate, then Elazar, the son of Aaron, died. V'yikbaru, and they buried him in Pinchas's property. So is what the verse continues. So Minayin lePinchas shelo hayalo leElazar. How is it that Pinchas had something that Elazar didn't have? So Melamed Shenasa Elazar Isha. So we see that Elazar must have married a woman. Umesa Bechaye Morisheha, and she died while those who would cause her to inherit were still alive. Umesu Morisheha, and then those who caused her to inherit would die, and therefore Virasha Pinchas, her son Pinchas, inherits her, and so as a result, and inherits that property. Umay v'omer. Now, why in the world are we telling two different stories? Why did we need a second one? Because v'chi tema Yair dahavin nasiv itza. Now, maybe you'll say it was Yair himself who married a woman who owned the various cities, Umesa, and then she dies, V'yarasa, and Yair inherited her rather than inheriting from his mother. Talmud Lomar, the Elazar ben Aaron Mace. So we'll have the story twice. We have two different stories that we can point to, and the Tanakh would not have told us both stories to teach us the same principle. We already would know the principle. We wouldn't need to have the story twice. So therefore, it must be that it's telling us something that we wouldn't have known. And okay, so therefore we're going to say that it must be dealing with the mother predeceasing those who would cause her to inherit, and as a result, when those who would cause her to inherit eventually pass, so then her children will inherit. And we are going to see again over this coming weekend that essentially anytime somebody passes away, you look down the descendants as far as it can go in order to see who is going to inherit. And only if there's no descendants, then, if somebody's going to inherit, if somebody is supposed to inherit first, you check all of their descendants before going into a different direction. So the
So why do we have the two proofs then? I mean, one of them would have been sufficient, or we could
because one of them might have, if we had only one of them, maybe it wasn't a story about a man inheriting from his mother who predeceased those who caused her to inherit, but rather it was about somebody marrying somebody and the wife passed away. Meaning maybe Yair married somebody and caused him to inherit, or maybe Pinchas married somebody and caused him to inherit. And that's why they each had property that their father didn't possess. But the Torah wouldn't have told us, the Torah writ large, wouldn't have told us both of these stories to tell us that principle, because we already know that principle from the Torah itself, we know that a husband inherits. So why did it need to specifically highlight the fact that these sons had property that their fathers did not have? It's to teach us the lesson that it must be that a son will inherit property from his mother if his mother doesn't receive that property until after she passes.
But what it's we have many cases where it could be maybe this, it could be maybe that. We could simply state the one case. To say it again, then if that's the case, why not give it three cases or four cases? I mean, I
No, because if it was one case, so then the point is that again, the principle that a husband inherits his wife, we get from the Torah. That's pretty clear. And so now the point is that if we're going to just tell us once the story, so then okay, maybe the Tanakh is just repeating something, because the Tanakh will sometimes repeat a rule and apply a rule that exists in the Torah. But for the Tanakh to tell us two stories that would apply the same rule that already we know about, that won't happen. That's what the Gemara is saying, and therefore we cannot interpret the story in the way we originally might the way we might have done otherwise. We cannot interpret it as a husband inheriting his wife, because if that were the case, why tell us both the Pinchas story and the Yair story? So rather, it must be that there were two that both of these stories are actually telling us about a mother who predeceases those who cause her to inherit. Okay, if that's not convincing to you, then we can just
okay, I
continue and
just all
we
right.
can have a further conversation at
No,
the end.
it's just okay, leave it like that.
Yeah. So now, uh, right, v'chitema denafla b'stei charamim. Well, maybe Yair really inherited it from his wife, and maybe the story of Pinchas is dealing with somebody who consecrated their field as a cherem vow, and that field was not redeemed, and so it became Pinchas's inheritance, and not because it goes to the Kohanim, and not a result of an inheritance of his mother. So Amr Kra Beno. No, well, the problem is that when it says the pasuk, it says Velazar ben Aaron mate v'yikveru oso begiv'at Pinchas beno asher nitain lo bahar Ephraim. So the point is that it specifically notes that Pinchas was his son. So Nachala Haruya Lo V'Yerusha Beno. So the point is that it's telling us that on some level, Elazar was supposed to inherit it, but his son inherited it instead. And how is that possible? It's possible if the wife predeceases those who would cause her to inherit. And so that's the bottom line, is that we see here that actually if that the only things that a husband will inherit are the current property of a wife, and any property that the wife would inherit post death will go to her children, and not necessarily to her husband, and not to her husband. And indeed, if she has no children, then we'll have to figure out a different direction for, and no descendants, I should say. If then we'll have to figure out a different direction for it to go. Okay, now let's see who this Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha is, because Tosos here gives us a nice little aside, and let's take a look at that Tosos, and we'll do it inside. Umadu bo mishmei de Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha. Omeri de Karcha hu Rabbi Akiva. That this Karcha person is Rabbi Akiva. Shahaya Kareach, because he was bald. Because as we see in the last chapter of Bechoros, Daf Nun Cherem and Aleph, de Ka'amar ben Azai, because Ben Azai said, Kol Chachmei Yisrael domin lefanai kikli pasashum, that all of the people, all the Chachamim in Israel are just like the covering of garlic, chutz min hakareach, except for the bald one, Hazeh, this bald one. And who was that referring to? At least where our currently understanding is that's referring to Rabbi Akiva. V'hayalo ben shishmo Yoshua, and he had a son whose name was Yoshua, and so Yoshua ben Karcha is Yoshua ben Rabbi Akiva. Keda Amrinan b'Shvuos, as we learn in Maseches Shvuos. Amar le Rabbi Yoshua bino shel Rabbi Akiva Rabbi Akiva, right? So we see that there's the Rabbi Akiva had a son, Rabbi Yoshua. Ve'ein nira l'Rabbeinu Tam, but this does not sit well with Rabbeinu Tam. Denehi debein azai hu de ka'amar le hachi b'lashon b'duchusa chas v'shalom shehaya lahalos lo shem al shum krachot. That so fine that we had Ben Azai would make on some level some kind of joke or about Rabbi Akiva being bald, and we're going to use that to give him as a name, the Ganayu. That's not appropriate. That's a not nice thing. So Kamo Allah Kareya, because for example, in Malachim, when Elisha passed by a bunch of youths, the youths mocked him for being bald. And then, of course, Elisha sicked on them a bunch of bears, and they killed 42 youths as a result of that. So that's the story that we have in Malachim Bet, and it's clear that the word kareach there, which again is bald, is not meant to be a compliment, and indeed is viewed very much as an insult. Uperak Shoel, the Amr le Hahu Guz'ah, the Rabbi Yoshua, Mehacha lekarchina kamahavi. So we have another location in Shabbos where we again reference a bald person. Shahaya Megana Oto al Shahaya Kareach. There too, he was insulting somebody based on being bald. V'od Amrina beParak Basra de Megillah. Shal Rebbe as Rebbe Yoshua ben Karcha, b'ma harakta yamim. And now another point is that we have another problem, because Rebbe himself, Rebbe Yehuda Anasi, says to Rebbe Yoshua ben Karcha, b'ma harakta yamim. How was it that you got to live to such an old age? To Amrle, Rebbe, and eventually Rebbe says Barcheni, to bless me, and Amrle, and Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha responds, Yehi ratzon shetagia lechetzi shnosai. You should be your will that you should reach at least half my years. Well, 1 second. Karcha hu Rabbi Akiva. If Rabbi Akiva is the Karcha of Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha, halo lo nisa bas kalba savua ad shekibel alav lilmod. He never, the Gemara tells us that Rabbi Akiva didn't marry the daughter of Kalba Savua until he committed to start learning. V'az haya kibar ben arba'im shana. And we know, as we know colloquially, that how old was Rabbi Akiva when he started learning Torah? He was 40. Kedetanya, arba'im, as we, arba'im shana asak prakmatya, that for 40 years he engaged in business. V'arba'im shana limaid lamad, and for 40 years he learned. V'arba'im shana limaid, and for 40 years he taught. B'kol yamav kuf chav shana, and he lived to 120. V'afilu nolad Rabbi Yoshua beno miyad kishenasah, and even if Rabbi Yoshua, his son, would have been born immediately when they got married. So we'll pretend that he was born at year 40. Akasi lo haya ki'im ben pei kishenolad Rebbe. Then he would have only been 80 when Rebbe was born. De Amar bePerak Basra de Kiddushin, because we saw at the end of Kiddushin, Ad Shalom Mace Rebbe Akiva, Nolad Rebbe, Nolad Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Rebbe Yehuda Hanasi was born when Rabbi Akiva died. Upachos memeya va'arba'im lo ahaya Rabbi Yoshua. Now, Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha could not be less than 140 when he blessed Rebbe, Kesheberach as Rebbe. The Upachos meshivim lo haya mevarcho. Because if you're less than if he couldn't possibly be best blessing him to live for fewer than 70 years, because 70 is considered a decent lifetime, but less than that is considered relatively short. The Kvar Haya Rebbe ben Shishim Shana. And if that were true, if we subtract 80 from 140, well, then it means that Rebbe would have been already 60 years old. Uma bracha hizu. What kind of bracha is that? Lebarchu be'eser shanim, to bless somebody with just 10 years. Ba'od, disvara shalom nolad ad shechazer Rabbi Akiva mebei Rab. Moreover, it makes much more sense to say that Rabbi Akiva didn't have children until he returned from learning. And that was Achar Kaf Dalet Shana. That was after 24 years. So that would be when he was 64. In Cain, Kishahaya Rabbi Yoshua ben Kufa Arbaim, when Rabbi Yoshua would have been 140, Kvar Haya Rebbe ben Peidalid. He would have already been 84. So, and then blessing somebody to reach half of 140, which is 70, when the person himself is already 84, Shehu Yoter Mechatze Yamav. That's already more than half of his life. So bottom line is that clearly Rabbeinu Tam does not think that Karcha of Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha is Rabbi Akiva. V'od sheperish Rabbeinu Nisim b'Megillas Starim shematza b'Bereshis Rabbah dechutz min hakareach, that the Rabbeinu Nisim actually found in the Sefer, that actually when then in connection with Bereshis Rabbah, that actually when it said chutz min hakareach, when way back earlier in this Tosos, we highlighted that Rabbi Yoshua, that Ben Azai referenced that everybody else was just like the covering of garlic, except for this bald one, that Haya Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, that was a reference to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, not Rabbi Akiva. Ella Omer Rabbeinu Tam de Karcha Hu Shame, and so as a result, it has nothing to do with Rabbi Akiva, and rather it's not as if Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is the Karcha either. Rather, Karcha is the name of somebody Kamo Korach. That actually, just as Korach is a name, so is Karcha a name, and so as a result, it is an individual name and not actually a nickname for Rabbi Akiva. So I thought that was a fun Tosfos to do, and so we went through it together. And now let's go back into the Gemara. And so
Not
we're going
sure
to
I
go.
followed all the math there. I have to go through it again.
So again, so very simple, right? If he was born, if Rebbe was born when Yoshua ben Karcha was 80, well then again, Yeshua ben Karcha would not have blessed somebody to live for half his life unless at least he was 140. So as a result, then it would mean that Rebbe was 60, and you don't just bless somebody for 10 years. And if anything, it's more likely that Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha, if he was the son of Rabbi Akiva, would have been only 56 when Rebbe was born, because most likely he was only born when his father was 64. And so as a result, if he was 56, then by the time he got to 140, then Rebbe would have been 84 already, and then blessing him with half his years is actually a curse, because you're saying that he should have died 14 years ago. So again, if you still didn't follow the math, you can write it all down and do it out again. But the bottom line is that Tosos doesn't think, and therefore Rabbeinu Tam rejects the idea that Karcha is Rabbi Akiva and says that it's just a stam name, and that's the story. Okay, so let's go to the two dots. Last line of Daf Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. So Tana b'nei achos v'lo benot achot, that we said we have a brisa that the sons of a sister, but not the daughters of a sister, will inherit. Okay, so if there are no children for the deceased, so then and the only sibling is a sister, and there are no parents. The parents of the deceased are also dead. So then it will go to the sister. It'll go to the sister, and through the sister to the children of the sister. And it says to the sons of the sister, but not the daughters. So Lamai Helchasa. What is this actually teaching us? So Rashbam, top of the Rashbam Kuf Yud Gimel Amarav, Mimat Lahu, Ha Vadai Yorshod, Atzi Iman, Shaharei Habat Yoreshes Ima. So, because it's clear that it can't mean that only the sons could inherit, but not the daughters, because a daughter inherits from her mother, just as a son inherits from the mother. Because when there are no sons, the daughters will inherit. U'b'makom ima od medes, because she stands in the place of the mother. Liyarish achei ima, to inherit the brothers of the mother. Sha'arei ha'isha yoreshes es acheha, because a woman inherits her brothers. B'makom she'ein ach, when there's no other brothers and no children either, obviously. Kedel kaman, as we will see, b'samach shortly. Demakish Yerusha Shniyal Yerusha Rishona, that we connect the two, the secondary Yerusha to a primary Yerusha. So so therefore, Amar Rav Sheshes, back into the Gemara, third word on Kuf Yud Gimel and Bet, L'Kadem. The point is just to tell us who comes first. That just as a son comes before a daughter in terms of inheritance, so too, if there are no children for the deceased, but the deceased has nieces and nephews, so then that are all from his sister, well, then the nephews will inherit before the nieces, and the nieces will only inherit when there are no nephews, when there's only one sibling. Of course, if there were multiple sisters, one sister could have nephews and another sister could have nieces, and both nephews and nieces could end up inheriting. So I want to just clarify that point. All right. So Tana Rav Shmuel. So back into
Well, how would
the
the nieces inherit
what?
them? They go to the nephews, right? How do the
All right, so
nieces?
let's do this out, right? So we have Ruvain has a sister Dina and a sister we'll call the second sister Nechama. Okay, and so Ruvain dies, and now with no children, and now Dina and Nechama are going to inherit, but Dina and Nechama have both passed away. Dina has only boys. Nechama has only girls. Well, now both boys and girls will end up inheriting, because both the girls will inherit Nechama's portion and the boys will inherit Dina's portion. So you can have both the girls and the boys inherit at the same time, because the girls that are the Nechama's children are inheriting as a result of Nechama, and the boys that are Dina's children are inheriting because of Dina. Now, if both Dina and Nechama had boys and girls, then you're exactly right. Then only the boys would inherit and none of the girls would inherit. But the point is that it doesn't have to be that way. And so that's what I was trying to highlight. Okay. So Tani Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak Kamei de Rav Huna. So Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak taught the following in front of Rav Huna. Vayarash, and he's going to inherit. This is the pasuk is from Bamidbar Parakav Zion pasuk Yud Aleph. The full pasuk is v'im achim la'aviv. If their father has no brothers, unesatem es nachalaso l'sheiro hakarov elav. Well, then the inheritance goes to those who are closest, the relatives who are closest, mimishpachto, from his family, v'yarashoto, and he will inherit it. There's the word v'yarash. So what is that coming to teach us? Makis Yerusha Shnia Liyarusha Rishona. That pasuk itself is referring to a secondary inheritance, and yet we use the term Yarash, which is a primary inheritance. So as a result, it teaches Ma Yerusha Rishona Ben Kodem Levas Af Yerusha Shnia Ben Kodem Levas. So whenever we have an inheritance, boys will take precedence over girls in the line. That's the important, in the line of descendants. Again, highlighting the point that I was trying to make before, that if both Dina and Nechama have passed away, it is possible that one of them could have boys and one of them could have only girls, and therefore girls will inherit at the same time, but they're taking based on their mother. And so as a result, it's within each mother's set of inheritors, that's who's going to we're going to put boys first. But of course, across different inheritors, so then you can end up with both boys and girls inheriting at the same time, just not at the same, not just not when they're both inheriting directly through the same person. Then you would not have the boys and girls at the same time, because then boys would again take precedence.
Well, where
Okay.
did we learn that the sister inherits the brother?
Um, so that was in our opening
Was
Mishnah.
it?
It was
Okay.
one of the examples we said was that a brother will cause his sister to inherit, right? And let's go back to the first Mishnah. Hold on. Back to Yeshnochlin. Well, you know what? You're right. I don't think we said it explicitly.
I
It was
remember
implicit.
the nephews discussed, but I don't
Yes, it was
remember that
implicit in the nephew's conversation. It was implicit in the nephew conversation
but it
that
could be that they could be. What I was thinking then was that the nephews, we skip the sister and the nephews inherit instead of the sister.
Yeah, no, that is certainly not how the Gemara is understanding it, and so clearly that is not the correct way to understand it. But you're absolutely right that we didn't explicitly say sisters inherit brothers in our Mishnah, and the truth is that maybe we could have, because we could have said that sisters inherit brothers and brothers inherit sisters, which would be a two-way thing. Um, uh, but um, but we did not specifically. You're right that we did not specifically mention that.
But that's kind of with all this discussion here, it's rather strange that we're just understanding implicitly now that the sisters inherit the brothers, because we've had a
Correct.
lot of detail back and forth who inherits who, the husband, the wife, the grandfather and the grandson, instead of, but now not to say that the sister inherits the brother, and we assume that, and then it goes, I would understand here that we're talking about the nephews or the nieces, but where do we learn that the sister, we could skip the sister?
Yeah, so I don't remember whether we've covered it or we're going to cover it, but I believe that it is covered here. But let's see if we can, as we go, we'll see if by the end of the weekend, if we haven't already covered it. So then we'll try and figure out exactly where the source is for that. But I'm pretty sure that either we have covered it or we're about to cover it.
I don't think we covered it, but
Okay,
okay.
so let's keep going. We'll see. I think that again it'll get covered. So Tani Rabba Bar Chanina Kamei de Rav Nachman. So Rav Chanina Rabba Bar Chanina said before Rav Nachman the following brisa: V'haya bayom hanchilo es banav. It shall be on the day that he causes his son to inherit. Bayom ata mapil nachalot. In the daytime, you can pass down inherit. Which what does that teach? Only during the daytime do you have inheritance. And you don't cause inheritances at night. Whoa, that seems to suggest that if somebody dies at night, that nobody inherits them. That doesn't seem right. So Amrle Abaye Elamiata Deshkiv Bimama Hu de Yarse Le Bane Man de Shachiv de Belayla Lo Yarse Le Bane. Are you telling me that the sons don't inherit their parents when if they die at night? No, that's not what we're saying. Dilma din nachalos kamart. Maybe you mean that the law, the judgment of inheritance doesn't apply. Titania, because we have another brisa. V'haisa livnei Yisrael luchukat mishpat. That it'll be to the children of Israel as a statute of judgment. This verse is from Bamidbar Kaf Zayin Pasuk Yud Aleph, and it's dealing with again it's dealing with the laws of inheritance, and
So
it
maybe that's
says
to do with the Dayanim when they sit for judgment and they discuss
correct. That's exactly what we're about to say.
Oh,
So ora Kola Parsha Kula Liotin. So now, as a result, the entire section of inheritance is being said that is going to be considered a judgment. Ukid Rav Yehuda, and it's all like Rav Yehuda, the Rav Yehuda, Shlosha Shenichnasu. So it's all like Rav Yehuda's. Now, let's take a look at the Rashbam here before we get to Rav Yehuda's statement. Dilma din nachlos kamrat she'ain dananosan ela biyom. That in the end, we are only going to cause the judgment to happen during the daytime. Kishar dine mamos, just like we have with respect to other monetary judgments. Diksiv behu, Beis David dino levoker mishpat. That in the house of David, it's judgment. Now, here it literally means diligently, levoker mishpat, will be judged diligently. But obviously, boker also means morning, and so we're going to understand it. Daha kol shar nachalot nami mikra mishpat. Now that we call every kind of inheritance using the term judgment, so as a result, everything will need to be judged during the daytime. Kedetanya, as we learned in a brisa, Diksiv Bisof Parshas Nachalos, Va'isa Levnei Yisrael Lechukat Mishpat, as we saw in the brisa that it cites the fact that it's Chukat Mishpat. That's the point, is that we considered it Midikari Lehu Mishpat, because it called it a judgment. Shma Minad Kol Shar Nachlos Nami Biyom. All the rulings associated with inheritance need to happen during the daytime. Okay, and now we can go back into the, we'll stop there in the Rashbam and back into the Gemara, and where the Gemara says, Ucha de Rav Yehuda, 4 lines up, beginning of the line in the Gemara. That when you have 3 people who come to visit a sick person, and that sick person is going to now give them directives for certain gifts. Ratzu, if they want, the 3 people who are visiting, Kosvin, they could write the document and sign it as witnesses. Ratzu osidin, or they could actually reach a judgment. But Shnayim, if it's just 2 people, so they don't have enough for a court case, Kosvin, then they have to write it. Ve'ein osin din, and then they don't get to make it as a judgment. V'amar Rav Chisda lo shanu ela biyom, and Rav Chisda teaches that it's only during the daytime, because as we turn to Kuf Yudalad Amud Aleph, aval b'layla afilu shlosha kosvin, but at night, even if you had 3 people, they would write it, because ve'ein osin din, and they would not be able to do judgment. Why? My timer dahavaluhu edim, because they are considered witnesses. Ve'ein aid na'aseh dayan, and once they have become witnesses, they cannot be judges. So Amar lei and so as a result, Rabba Bar Chanina, who had taught this ambiguous brisa about the fact that it seems like only inheritance happens during the daytime and not at night, says, yes, that's exactly it. Hachinami kamina. That's exactly what I meant. And so as a result, we see from here that in fact, we're going to have that when it comes to the judgments associated with inheritance, those cases only can happen during the daytime and not at night. Now, having mentioned that, it's worth noting, especially since we just passed Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that when it comes to Hataras Nedarim, the informal Hataras Nedarim that we do, that actually, when it comes to that, you are allowed to do that at night. It is not considered the same kind of court case as a monetary judgment. And indeed, if necessary, you can even have relatives sitting on the Beis Din while you testify, and you can have relatives of each other's, 2 relatives sitting on that Beis Din. So again, it's worth noting that although you might have thought that all Beit Din are necessarily must be equal, that's not necessarily the case. In some situations, we can allow relatives to be to participate, and again, an example of that is where we do Hataras Nedarim. So we'll
how do we say here that these witnesses or the Dayanim become witnesses? And why did we even have the Hava Mina that they were Dayanim in the first place when they sat at nighttime, let's say.
Well, again, the point is that if we ignore for a moment the time that they came in, then there are three of them. So now that the person on the deathbed is suggesting that he wants to make a deathbed gift, so maybe they should act as judges and confirm the gift right then and there. And the answer is that because that is a monetary judgment, and monetary judgments don't happen at night. So as a result, if even though there are three of them, if it's at night, the only thing they can do is effectively write a contract and be witnesses on the contract. And then that contract will get brought to court and be confirmed in court during the daytime. So that's what we're saying. So the point is
I thought
that
we were trying to prove that judgment cannot take place at night. Now we're stating it a little differently. We're saying that they are becoming, because it's night, they become witnesses. But if we're trying to prove that it's nighttime, judgment doesn't take place, it doesn't work.
no, the whole point is that yes, it does work, because the whole reason that they have to be witnesses and can't be judges is because judgment doesn't work at night. If judgment worked at night, then they could try to sit as a court. And this and Rav Huna is telling us a
No, I
statement,
understand
or
that,
Rav
but
Chisda
it
rather is
doesn't.
telling us.
That I understand. If we say that judgment only takes place at night, then it wouldn't work. But if we want to prove that judgment doesn't take place at night, then the argument doesn't work. If we're using this to prove that judgment doesn't take place at night.
I don't understand. We're proving that there is a halacha that says that judgment doesn't take place at night. And so we're citing Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says specifically that when Rav Yehuda said that the three people who visit a sick person can sit as either judges or witnesses, that's only true during the daytime. So that shows, because at night they can't be judges. So as a result, doesn't that show that in fact the statement that we made in the beginning is correct, namely that you can't have judgment of monetary issues at night?
No, it doesn't prove. It just says it confirms what our initial a priori statement was that judgment cannot take place at night. Then, because we say judgment can't take place at night, these people cannot be judges; they can only be witnesses. But doesn't
Well,
that?
again, it depends on what you mean by proof, right? The
Yeah,
point is that the statement that the Gemara introduced was that this ruling that judgments have to happen during the daytime is consistent with Rav Yehuda, and that's exactly what we've proven. We've proven that Rav Yehuda, meaning if you want to say that this is a proof, and it's not really a proof because all you're doing is telling me that somebody else said so, then I agree with you, because really we're not trying to prove what's the source, etc. We're just trying to prove that in fact there are opinions that say that the judgment cannot happen at night. But if you're trying to say, well, what's the source in the Torah? You're right. This was not a proof of what was the source in the Torah. This was just a proof that in fact people say that judgments can only happen, have to happen during the daytime and cannot happen at night.
Yeah, I, I'm not completely satisfied with that. Because if we want, it sounds more like a support that, okay, we say judgment can't take place at night. Three people show up, so therefore they can't be judges. But if I want to say to present an argument that this is the reason why judgment can't take place at night, then that argument falls flat. It
Yes,
doesn't.
yes. I understand now your point, which is to say that we're not providing a rationale in this statement. We are only providing an indication that this is a position that exists within the realm of positions. And specifically, Rav Yehuda's statement, as understood by Rav Chisda, is that you can only have judgment during the daytime. You're absolutely right that we have not proven why it is that that's the case, or what's the basis for saying that that's the case. We've only proven, and that's all we try to do, because the Gemara specifically says, Vikid Rav Yehuda, and this is like Rav Yehuda, meaning we haven't said that it's that we're trying to bring a proof. We're just trying to say that this opinion, that in fact inheritance judgment cases can only happen during the daytime, that and that inheritance cases are just like monetary cases, and that's in fact what then we're just proving that in fact that is an opinion that and monetary cases happen only during the daytime. Well, you know what? We have somebody who says effectively that, because Rav Yehuda's statement, of course, is about on some level an inheritance, because we're talking about deathbed gifts. And so as a result, and in connection with how he wants his estate to be handled. And so as a result, that is a mishpat regarding inheritance. And so as a result, we see that Rav Yehuda's statement, as interpreted by Rav Chisda, is consistent with the brisa that Rabbi Bar Chanina was teaching, as we're going to understand it. And that's all we're trying to do. We're not trying to prove the basis for the brisa. In fact, the basis for the brisa is really is the pasuk that we say v'haya b'yom hanchilo es banav, right? That we're going to say that the basis of the fact that it says biyom, we're going to say that it needs to happen during the daytime. So that's the basis. It's essentially a gzeris akasav, or a derivation from, a drasha from a pasuk. And so that is the reasoning. And now we're confirming that somebody actually agrees with that reasoning, and that therefore our interpretation of that brisa is a potential one and an accurate one. And again, Rabbi Bar Chanina in the end says, yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to say, is that cases involving inheritance, just like monetary cases, need to be handled during the daytime. Okay, so we will pick up, God willing, from there. I'm going to stop the recording and we'll go over just a little bit of the schedule coming up.